About a decade ago, the Detroit Institute of Art hosted a traveling exhibit called Rembrandt and the Face of Jesus, for which I was fortunate enough to get tickets. The show explored how Rembrandt's approach to portraying Jesus changed over time. Of all the examples, there was one that really struck me. In about 1644, Rembrandt painted the story of the woman taken in adultery from John 8. You know the one. The scribes and the Pharisees bring an adulterous woman to Jesus, wanting to stone her. And he says, "Let whoever is without sin cast the first stone." And they all slink away. In Rembrandt's painting, Jesus is dressed simply. Although his expression is compassionate, he is nonetheless standing, looking down at the woman who kneels at his feet crying, while the scribes and Pharisees gesture for his verdict. Above this little gathering, the steps of the Jerusalem temple swoop lavishly up to a figure seated on some kind of throne. The contrast between the opulence and judgment of the temple and the simplicity and mercy of Jesus is itself judgmental in its own way, and let it be said, gives off a distinct whiff of anti-Semitism. Then, in about 1659, 15 years later, Rembrandt returned to this subject again, this time in a simple sketch. In this second portrayal, there is no temple. The scale is much more human, and it is Jesus who is kneeling down, quietly writing in the dirt with his finger, as the weeping woman and her accusers stand above him. He is literally the lowest figure in the image. His face is quiet and thoughtful, and whatever he's writing on the ground seems to be drawing the attention of the scribes and Pharisees around him. In keeping with Rembrandt's general development toward a Jesus who was less overtly triumphal, the image emphasizes his humility, his gentleness, his humanity. What happened in the 15-year stretch of time between those two works? Well, Rembrandt overspent his means, was forced to sell much of what he owned and move to humbler accommodations, and had relationships first with his child's nurse while his wife was dying, and then with a maid. We can only guess as to the consensuality of these encounters. This maid was subsequently banned from receiving communion in her church for committing the acts of a whore with Rembrandt the painter. And although Rembrandt remained with her and had a child with her, he never married her because to do so would have relinquished his access to a trust account left by his wife. Now, I don't want to over-psychologize here, but I think it's fair to say that between 1644 and 1659, Rembrandt came face to face with some of his own demons. Uncontrolled spending, sexual betrayal, greed, grandiosity. By 1659, these qualities had been with him long enough to do tangible damage. And as can happen when life takes people down a peg or two, the encounter with these demons brought out in him an even more compassionate, even more human, and I would argue even more accurate vision of the Son of God. That is the value of demons, I suppose. That's the gift of them. If we live with them long enough, they can teach us how deeply we need God. I think this may explain something very strange about Mark's gospel. Perhaps you've noticed it. For the whole first half of the story, the whole first half of the gospel, not a single person recognizes Jesus' true identity. Not the crowds, not the Pharisees or Romans or priests or scribes, not John the Baptist, not even the disciples, who only just begin to catch on in chapter 8, halfway through, when Peter becomes the first human being in Mark to identify Jesus as the Messiah. But you know who does recognize Jesus right from the start? The demons, the unclean spirits, who he keeps casting out of people again and again. They name who he is, beginning with the unclean spirit in the text from last week, who said, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And continuing with the demons Jesus casts out today, whom the text says he doesn't permit to speak because they knew him. Maybe this is Mark's way of pointing to the same spiritual reality that the life and art of Rembrandt also points to. Maybe it's Mark's way of suggesting that our demons, our darknesses, can become a vehicle for our recognition of God and our deepening understanding of God's great compassion. I mean, I don't know about you all, but it wasn't until I'd lived a bit, discovered my arrogances, broken some hearts, done a few people wrong, and had some wrong done to me, that I started to seek out something beyond myself. I think I was in my late 20s before I really began to catch on that maybe I wasn't quite the self-reliant paragon of humanity that I thought I was. Maybe I had a few demons myself, and maybe they were showing me something that I needed to pay attention to. I don't think this is unusual. Addiction is a demon, if ever there were one, and most of us in the recovery community are quick to cite our higher power as a necessary and humbling source of strength. Christian writer Henry Nouwen famously identified our own woundedness as the source of our compassion for others and ability to offer healing. And surely, part of the mellowing process that can come with aging has to do with living long enough to rack up a few mistakes and disasters, come face to face with a few of our demons, and learn to be less judgmental. The writer Megan Daum describes this process especially well when she recounts going to her 25th college reunion and discovering a surprising sense that she knew her classmates because she saw the ways in which the passing of time had yanked some of our certainty out from under us. She writes, "We were human in that way you have to grow into. We were human in the way you can't be when you're 20 or even 25, by which I mean we were in direct dialogue with our failures and limitations. Decades earlier, we'd been bright, shiny nothings. Now we were fully formed somethings in various states of disenchantment and disrepair." Our tradition calls these failures and limitations demons. We're taught to resist them. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but there's a paradox at the heart of the Christian journey, which also holds that they are our teachers. They need not only cast us into various states of disenchantment and disrepair, although that is probably inevitable, they can also offer us this profoundly enriching gift of our own humility. interdependence and compassion, of becoming human in that way that you have to grow into, of encountering the hole inside that only God can fill. Amen.